Good morning. Welcome to this place of peace, justice, and hope. In this Unitarian Universalist congregation, we affirm that no matter who you are, who you love, or where you are on your journey, you are welcome here. For those of you joining online, we're very glad that you're with us. If you are visiting today, we ask that you sign the visitor's book in the living room. And if you would like to join us for coffee downstairs, if you feel like it, please take a green coffee mug so that we can greet you. Also, members and friends, to help connect, remember to wear your name tags with pronoun stickers, please. And if you need a name tag, you can request one in the living room. I'm Tony Metters. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm very pleased to be with you this morning as your worship associate. Today our music will be provided by Jamie Passman and Dennis Saget, and our tech and YouTube services are produced by Alex Dvorak. Childcare is available for children under the age of 5 in our playroom located on the lower level of the religious education building across the alley. Youngsters are welcome to join the play group when the older children are sung out to religious education. But please know that all ages may remain here during the service. All voices are welcome. I ask you to please place your phones in the worship mode, no dings or ringing. But please feel free to take pictures to share with the community, post on social media just to let folks know where you are. Be mindful of the people around you when you do that, please. Church life is bustling, as always. Following the service, our animal ministry will have the worldwide vegan bake sale. $10 gets you a bag full of delicious plant-based treats, cruelty-free treats. One of my favorite events. I will be down there filling my bag. Proceeds will go to George's Birdplace Sanctuary, which rescues and provides safe shelter for farmed birds who have been dumped, abused, or neglected. Scrumptulescent. After you grab your treats, and as long as the weather holds, make sure to join us outside for UCH's world-famous Beltane celebration. Join Green Man and the Snow Queen as they welcome the summer, dancing around the maypole. It will be a party worthy of the gods. There's always a lot going on around the church, and you can read all about it in the news and notes, which arrives in your inbox Fridays. And there's also printed copies available downstairs. And if you are not receiving news and notes and you would like to, you can request a copy at the table in the living room. Turn to Gene.
Thank you. We enter this sanctuary. We enter this sanctuary for kindness and comfort. We enter this sanctuary of hope for equality. May those who labor to survive live to know justice. We enter this sanctuary of love and vocation. May our bonds of solidarity be strengthened. We enter this sanctuary of courage and friendship, and may we proceed hand in hand towards freedom. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today and sharing this service with you. My name is Gene, and my pronouns are he and him. And this is the final service of the month, whose theme is interdependence. As we know we are connected to all who have come before us, we must acknowledge that we in the western suburbs inhabit areas that are traditional territories of indigenous peoples, including the Kickapoo, Peoria, Kaskaskia, Potawatomi, and others. We acknowledge this not to be performative, but to remind ourselves of the great heritages that have been lost to the area and to learn and to connect with those heritages. As people trying to live into a more just world, we have a responsibility to acknowledge the history and legacy of colonialism, the harm done to Native peoples, and also work to repair that harm. And as we welcome those heritages into our hearts, let us welcome ourselves to the service today. Please share with me our chalice lighting words. As we light this chalice, may we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Thank you. And now please stand as you are able or willing and join us in our opening hymn, number 109, Marching, Marching, Marching.
Our first reading is by the Reverend Sarah Scotchko. I was waiting for my chalupa in the drive-thru when I saw a sign on the back door. Danger! Never open this door after dark. Always look before you open this door. Your life could depend on it. One of my first jobs was at Wendy's, and I remember having to watch the video about what to do in an armed robbery situation. We were taught where the escape latch was, on the inside of the walk-in freezer. This inadvertently made armed robbery seem like a more attractive career path. Certainly it seemed more profitable, but had all things been equal, I'd still rather be on the outside of the freezer than in it. Nobody should die at their job, but it seemed especially crummy to be risking my life for, at that time, $6.35 an hour. It was tiring and hectic work, and it came with duties I would have never imagined before working there. Sometimes giant tropical spiders would jump out of the crates of potatoes. Once it was a scorpion. Whose job was it to catch the scorpion? I worked with a married couple who had immigrated from Iraq and who had 3 small children at home. In their old country, she had been a doctor and he'd been an engineer. I still think of them whenever I hear the argument that if unskilled workers wanted to get paid more, they should get an education and find a better job. The back door at the Taco Bell reminded me once again that there is no such thing as unskilled labor, and everyone who works behind a cash register or flat top or fryer deserves to be paid well for the work they do. The hours and days of a human life have value beyond measure. That ends the reading. And now I invite the young and young at heart to join us for our Time for All Ages.
Good morning. All right, so this is another story that I'm going to need some help with. The title is Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type. All right, so your part is click, clack, moo, click, clack, moo, clickety, clack, moo. All right, so let's try it. Click, clack, moo, click, clack, moo, clickety, clack, moo. All right, good job. Farmer Brown has a problem. His cows like to type. All day long he hears, at first he couldn't believe his ears. Cows that type? Impossible. Then he couldn't believe his eyes. Dear Farmer Brown, the barn is very cold at night. We'd like some electric blankets. Sincerely, the cows. It was bad enough that cows had found the old typewriter in the barn. Now they wanted electric blankets? No way, said Farmer Brown. No electric blankets. So the cows went on strike. And so did the TV. So the cows went on strike and they left a note on the barn door. Sorry, we're closed. No milk today. No milk today, cried Farmer Brown. In the background, he heard the cows busy at work. The next day, he got another note. Dear Farmer Brown, the hens are closed too. They'd like electric blankets. Sincerely, the cows. The next day, the farmer got another note. Closed. No milk, no eggs. No eggs, cried Farmer Brown. In the background, he heard. Cows the type? Hens on strike? Who ever heard of such a thing? How can I run a farm with no milk and no eggs? Farmer Brown was furious. He looks pretty furious. Farmer Brown got out his own typewriter. Dear cows and hens, there will be no electric blankets. You are cows and hens. I demand milk and eggs. Sincerely, Farmer Brown. Now, Duck was a neutral party, so he brought the ultimatum to the cows. The cows held an emergency meeting. Animals gathered around the barn to snoop, but none of them could understand moo. So all night, Farmer Brown waited for an answer. Duck knocked on the door early the next morning and handed Farmer Brown this note. Dear Farmer Brown, we will exchange our typewriter for electric blankets. Leave them outside the barn door and we will send Duck over with the typewriter. Sincerely, the cows. Farmer Brown decided that this was a pretty good deal. So he left the blankets next to the barn door and waited for Duck to come with the typewriter. There they are with their electric blankets. But the next morning, he got another note. Dear Farmer Brown, the pond is quite boring. We'd like a diving board. Sincerely, the ducks. Click, clack, quack. Click, clack, quack. Clickety, clack, quack. What do you think happens? Thanks for sharing my story and participating, and we will now go off to RE.
Thank you. We were going to sing them out, but I felt like we couldn't show up that little diddly at the end. So instead, we gather each week to affirm our community, to affirm that together we are more than we would ever be alone, to affirm that we begin in love and embody belonging. We gather knowing that we will be seen, heard, and known, and offer that to all who would find companionship with us. And we gather with the intention to share that love and bring belonging to our world. We share our offering as a living out of our values and as the spiritual practice of stewardship. So please join us as we say our offering words together. This church is made up of all of us. It is what we learn together, the work we do together, the fun we have together. It is what we share with one another, with the people around us, and with all the world. We now gratefully receive your contribution. Thank you in advance for your generosity.
The song we just heard from Dennis, thank you, it's called 16 Tons. And I didn't know what he was going to play, but then I said, yeah, I know that song. Who else had that same? So here's some fun facts about the song 16 Tons, graciously provided to us from Dennis, who just played it. The song was written by Merle Travis, who came from a long line of coal miners. The song became a hit for Tennessee Ernie Ford in 1955. As many of you know, the company store was owned and run by the coal company and was the only place where miners could redeem the script in which they were paid. As a result, the miners were in constant debt. The straw boss is a derogatory term for a low-level boss. The company store may be gone, but it has been replaced by student loan debt, credit card debt, and large companies that claim not to be able to pay their workers a living wage. This Land Is Your Land was written by Woody Guthrie in 1940 as a response to the God Bless America sung by Kate Smith. I did not know that. The song did not become our second national anthem until it was included in an elementary school song book in the early 60s, minus the first 3 verses. When these 3 verses are included, the song takes on a whole different meaning. Please join us as we sing This Land Is Your Land.
Thank you. So I should make clear that the marching song was my idea and This Land was Dennis's idea. So obviously one of us has a better handle on things than the other. My grandfather, Thomas Camper, worked at Caterpillar. I feel like I'm missing something. Here, give me 1 second. That's much better. Oops. My grandfather, Thomas Camper, worked at Caterpillar. I grew up in Peoria, and that was not uncommon. In the 80s, what distinguished workers in Peoria wasn't really whether or not they worked at Caterpillar. It was whether they worked in the cat factory or the cat offices. My grandfather worked in the cat factory. His brother in the same cat factory, his brother-in-law in a different cat factory. I had uncles, I'm gonna fall off this. I had uncles and cousins and in-laws and step-family, and they all worked at the cat factories. My family was factory folk. It's kind of interesting looking back on the 1980s because there was a very real, visceral fear of us losing our jobs. Not me personally, I was in school, but I remember in second grade being told we're all gonna lose our jobs. And that was not unique to the 1980s. In the 90s, it was Mexico. In the 2000s, it was immigrants. Now it's AI. But in the 80s, the big boogeyman coming to steal our livelihoods was robots. And in Peoria, we were terrified of robots. And I think if you look at the movies in the 80s, like that was kind of a national-wide opinion as well. Robots were right up there with like Japanese efficiency. And I feel like if someone would have come up with a horror movie called Six Sigma Robots in 1986, it would have been the biggest blockbuster of all time. My grandfather was born in 1938 in that sweet spot where he was too young for the Korean draft, but too old for the Vietnam. After marrying my grandmother, they moved to Chicago, where he joined the police serving warrants. It was during that time that my mother was born, and he also got promoted to detective, and he worked on some pretty high-profile cases. Eventually, he decided that the priorities of the Chicago Police Department did not align with his own, and that's a whole other story. And he moved back to Peoria to raise his family. Now, at this time, and it might still be the case, in Peoria, you had to live within the city limits for 1 year before you were able to join the police force. So to wait out that year, he got a job at Caterpillar. He ended up working there until he retired in about 1997. And he would tell me later that if he knew he was going to be stuck at Caterpillar for 3 years, he would have driven right through Peoria into St. Louis. If you're listening, I'm glad you stayed in Peoria. My grandpa never went to college. Instead, he joined an apprenticeship program and worked his way to machinist for R&D projects at CAT. I remember as a child, we went to a parade where they had some sort of military system that CAT helped implement, and he was so proud that he helped design components for that system. A few years later, I remember joining him for lunches on the picket line. He was very proud of graduating from that apprenticeship program. My grandparents used to long for the days when you could live off of a high school education. They used to say, when we were kids, you went to high school, then you could raise a family. They did not take that education for granted, but they did think it should grant you an opportunity. Today, we hear that our youth is entitled when they say that college degrees should automatically allow certain rights in the workplace. But I grew up hearing my grandparents say that it was a shame that children today had to feel like they have to go to college just to support a family. We lived with my grandparents for several years after my parents got divorced. And we didn't grow up with a lot of money, but we felt like we were middle class, and we definitely were raised with middle class expectations. I graduated college only because I grew up assuming I would graduate college. I'm sure at least some of you know of the 1966 Congressional Report on Equality on Educational Opportunity. That's a mouthful, so a lot of you probably are more familiar with the shorthand name, the Coleman Report. This report was conducted by Congress to study the causes and solutions to a wide gap in educational levels, particularly between white and black students. I guess in the 60s, Congress identified a problem and then would study that problem and then try to find objective ways to solve that problem. It was a different time. The leading liberal thought going into the report was that educational gaps were caused primarily by segregation, funding, and classroom quality. But what the report found was, one implication stands out above all, that schools bring little influence to bear on a child's achievement that is independent of their background and general social context, and that this very lack of an independent effect means the inequalities imposed on children by their home, neighborhood, and peer environment are carried along to become the inequalities which with they confront adult life at the end of school. Now, the Coleman report did not say that schools don't matter, but there is a larger social implication to this, right? That if you're raised poor, you tend to adult poor. But the opposite is also true. And there is no question that I'm at where I'm at today because my grandfather was a union worker at Caterpillar. I do not see a path to prosperity for myself if he, for that year, decided to take a job as, let's say, a lower paid construction worker. I do have to take a little sidebar here because I do not want to take anything away from my mother, who worked harder than I've ever worked to support her family. And my grandmother also worked. Her primary occupation was mother, but she balanced being a mother while also contributing financially to the well-being of the family, and that was at a time when that meant something very different than it does today. And I'd just like to shout out that I am nothing without those two. But I am also prosperous today because my grandparents owned a house and were able to move their children through a middle-class upbringing, and that happened because of a union job. Organized labor in the U.S., and I'm sure in many places of the world, has become largely an ideologic argument, but it's not. There is objective data to back up the assertions that organized labor is good for the worker, and for the worker's surrounding community, and for the economy at large. So first off, let's just state the obvious. Union workers make more than non-union workers doing the same job. I guess that's a debate now. I don't know. You know, if that wasn't true, do you think Amazon would really have a problem with hiring union workers? I mean, like, come on. Research by the LA Times found that unionized workers in the private sector have wages about 25% higher than otherwise similar non-union workers. Those wages do come at a literal cost in the form of union dues. But a 2016 paper co-written by the Illinois Economic Policy Institute and the University of Illinois found that for every dollar spent on unions in Illinois, workers got back $6.12. And that's after-tax money in your pocket income. Additionally, unionized workers are 14% more likely to have health insurance and 2% less likely to rely on food stamps, and that money goes back into the economy. They estimated that 33,000 additional jobs are provided in Illinois every year based on union household income and consumer spending of that additional income. And even though union membership is basically at an all-time low right now, you can see a significant correlation between membership and income across all workers. So one thing that I think we're missing in church is charts and graphs. I have often sat where you're sitting and thought to myself, man, this presentation by Beth is really great, but you know what would make it better? Some charts and graphs. So there we go. This is a chart I made. They're going to get better. But this is union membership by state in blue. And I cannot read that. That's annual household income in orange, and that's sorted by annual household income. And based on this graph, you can see that state by state, you can't really make a prediction about union membership and income, and vice versa. But taken as a whole, there's an obvious correlation there. And I get that correlation is not causation, right? I also took Philosophy 101 as a freshman, Tucker. But come on, those lines are the same. They're the same line, right? That is from, again, I can't read that, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, by the way. That's primary research right there, so that's the highlight. It's all downhill from here. We talk about interdependence and how Grandpa's union job indirectly allowed me to make more money, and that is borne out objectively as well. And I found all sorts of evidence that organized labor decreases income inequality. So here's one that compares income inequality for Social Security taxable income by membership over time. And again, this is Social Security taxable income, not all income. And even within that relatively narrow range, you can see that there's a big gap as union membership decreases in the inequality. Inequality is the black line. Here's one that compares income inequality for social, They become more pronounced when comparing membership with the share of income going to the top 10%. So again, the red is income in top 10%, the blue is union membership. So there has always been a correlation between that. And that's why there's not more unions in this country, because the top 10% want that red line to keep going up. The logical conclusion of this would be as membership decreases, so does the share of income going to the middle class. That's actually not logical, though. That's objective. That is union membership compared to the share of income going to the middle class. It's pretty obvious. And this is not an American occurrence. Like, this is not an American thing. In 1980, the UK government under Margaret Thatcher, who I refer to as Britain's hot Ronald Reagan, passed the opaquely titled Employment Act, which made it harder to picket and harder to form new unions, and wouldn't you know it, income inequality shot up. So see that red tip right there? That was 1980, and that red line going down is union membership, and that blue line going up is income inequality in Britain. So it's not the United States, it's labor. Impacts on income inequality are especially acute among minorities and women. That same LA Times article I referenced earlier was actually studying rates of union membership among blacks in the US, which peaked in the early 1970s for men and in the late 1970s for women. And it found, and I'm going to quote, had union membership rates for women remained at late 1970s levels, racial wage inequalities among women in private sector jobs today would be reduced by as much as 30%. And if rates of union membership among African American men working in the private sector were as high today as in the early 1970s, weekly wages would now be about $50 higher. For a full-time worker, that translates to an income increase of $2,600 a year. Regardless of race, all male workers have lost ground in the private sector as unions have declined. So we're focusing a lot on wages here, but there are significant quality of life improvements as well. We already talked about how members are more likely to have health insurance, but they're also less likely to need it. So occupational injuries are actually higher among union workers than non-union workers. You'll hear that sometimes. But what they're doing is they're comparing union workers to the population at large, and generally union workers have more dangerous jobs, right? Like, so I'm a software administrator. There aren't very many union workers when I go to software conferences, right? There is evidence that within individual industries, union shops have safer employment. In the construction industry, for example, publicly reported OSHA data found that union workshops are 19% less likely to have an OSHA violation and had 34% fewer violations per OSHA inspection than non-union workers. Overall, while unions represent 14% of the construction industry employees, their employees account for only 5% of industry's OSHA violations. So that concludes the college textbook portion of the sermon. I appreciate you sticking with me. If unions are so good, why is their membership dropping? Well, changes in job is one reason. A logical reason is like the robots, right? We were right in the 80s. The robots did take our jobs. If you walk on the CAT floor now, it's significantly different than when I was a child. And people say America doesn't make anything anymore, but we actually make a lot of the most expensive stuff in the world. We make planes and cars and ships. But those are now being assembled mostly by robots, and robots don't need unions. Well, robots don't need unions yet. AI comes for us all, Elon. And what do we do about that? Like, I don't know. As Britain's hot Ronald Reagan would say, that's a sticky wicket. Of course, we've lost jobs to globalization as well, and many of those jobs were union jobs, and what's worse, they typically went to locations where worker pay and worker rights are not as strong as they are in the US. So when we talk about International Workers' Day, the focus is organized labor, and obviously that's what I've been focusing on today as well. But we cannot forget the impact that our consumer culture has on workers less fortunate than us around the world. So I do want to say, before I go all rage against the machine on US foreign policy, historically speaking, like, we're not exactly the worst thing that's ever happened. People used to say with pride, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and that phrase was a reflection of a globalization effort that resulted in a level of oppression that does not have a modern equivalency. And with the possible exception of the slave trade, probably never had a US equivalency at all. So let's keep things in context. That being said, our hands are not clean. Just as I can trace my prosperity to my grandfather's union job, you can draw a direct line from the current immigration crisis to various American corporations and the US government's economic exploitation of Central American farmers and laborers. The most infamous of these were perhaps the hoarding of land and government manipulation by the United Fruit Company, now currently Chiquita. And although that might have been the most severe, it was not an anomaly. U.S. policy did not merely contribute to economic exploitation, it actively engaged in the suppression or even overthrow of political parties for the sole purpose of increases profits and geopolitical dominance. And that is not a conspiracy theory. The CIA has fessed up to that. The U.S. helped to drive people to poverty to support a certain standard of living. And then we look on in a mix of disbelief and indignation when those same people come here to participate in an economy that they helped to create. Now, we do have an immigration problem at the border. I'm not denying that. And we do need to do something to alleviate it. And I don't know what that looks like in the short term. But in the long term, the most effective and humane way to do that is to invest back in our continental neighbors' communities. And investment takes a lot of forms. I'm not saying that we fly a helicopter full of cash to Venezuela's president's office and then just drop it off, right? And it also should not be incumbent upon the taxpayers. Like, corporate responsibility has to play a part in this as well. But we should work to help them provide a standard of living that they do not want to risk their lives to escape from. Now, there is little we can do about our past except try to repair the damage, but we do continue to engage in exploitative practices worldwide. An increasingly common descent from the political right to the electrification of our vehicle fleet is the terrible working conditions and environmental impact from the mining of the precious materials used to make the batteries. And to be clear, these arguments are made in bad faith. And car electrification of the fleet is good for the environment. I will say that if the right truly cares about worker rights in the environment, I will gladly bring them back to the table. But their hypocrisy does not make them wrong. Contrarily, the U.S.'s dependency on new technologies to replace the materials which cause that suffering is woefully inadequate. And this goes way beyond batteries. At the end of the day, the U.S. is buying goods. We should demand that they're produced in a way that lives up to our values. And we should be working to improve conditions of the poor for all people right now. So what can we do? Well, for starters, you can vote with your checkbook. Commercialism is often touted as an evil rod upon our world, but it can be a force for good, and it can be a force for positive change. That cost of that force is not cheap often. It doesn't necessarily have to cost more to buy ethically produced goods, but we all know that in practice, oftentimes it does. And we shouldn't make every spending decision a purity test. Like, I really don't like Amazon, but there are times when I really like buying from Amazon. And my car was assembled in the United States, but it was not assembled in a union shop. Although, to try to prevent personal hypocrisy, I think I'm just gonna buy Mustang convertibles for the rest of my life. So if you take one thing out of this speech, buy more Mustang convertibles. All that said, if you are able to afford to spend according to our values, just consider what you're spending money on. And we can't solve all the world's problems, but we can start making things better here at home. Some of those choices can be kind of easy. So, like, I'm equidistant from a Jewel and a Walmart, and one of those is a union shop and one of them isn't. And I haven't done any research, but I'd be willing to guess that wages and benefits reflect that difference. And we can work to defeat anti-labor legislation and policies in our backyards. I don't have time to get into right-to-work states, but hint, they're terrible. And I had a whole series of rants that I cut out of this for time. But Washington has engaged in a persistent assault on labor for the past 40 years, and it does not end with the right to organize. We live in a political system that ostensibly fights for the middle class and family values, but seemingly goes out of its way to make it harder for lower-income parents to raise their children while erecting barriers to the middle class once those children grow up. And when we talk about that, by the way, let's not let people blame all of Illinois' financial woes on the greedy Chicago teachers. Like, that is a very nuanced situation, and they work very hard at a very tough job, and they deserve our support. But the good news is we voted for all these people, and we can kick them out again. And communitively, we can let them know that. And that's hard work, but everything that's worth doing is. And there are bright spots and glimmers of hope. I do think one of the reasons organized labor has decreased in this country is because the regional consolidation of political power among the two parties. And organized labor has long been associated with the Democrat Party, like we all know that. But times are a-changin'. We all know that the working class has had a hard right shift in recent years. I don't think I can say that the official position of this church is a bad thing, but I will tell you my position is that is a very bad thing. But it does mean that the Republican Party is now reflected in labors in ways that it has not been for a very long time. And if the labor movement is careful, we can use that to expand acceptance and even willful adoption of organization across the political spectrum. And that has happened. Tennessee just voted recently to unionize a UAW plant, a Volkswagen plant with the UAW, and the UAW is optimistic of efforts to expand the plants in Carolinas and Georgia. And a widening income gap and a sense of hopelessness by a generation that now views college as an impediment to prosperity instead of a stepping stone to it, again, a very bad thing, has opened up new avenues for labor, including re-examining apprenticeship programs like my grandfather graduated from and expanding organization in the fields that do not typically have it. Not everybody is going to graduate college, and we shouldn't tell them that they should, and we should continue to support them if they don't. Like baristas or logistic workers, like unionize Amazon. I think that the renewal of the union movement that we are seeing since the beginning of the pandemic works with the cyclical turning of the seasons. When the days and nights are darkest, the human spirit is only sleeping and will always rise up. I never knew I could write something so beautiful. That was Dave Lloyd. That was Dave Lloyd who wrote that. That makes way more sense now. If only we could, metaphorically, celebrate the cycle of the seasons. Maybe some ancient pageant that could remind us of our interdependence upon ourselves and our earth. But I suppose we will have to suffer with Blue Home. And maybe afterwards, something will come up.
Please join me in these words to extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of its truth, the warmth of this community, or the fire of our commitment These we carry in our hearts and share with all the world.